This is Chapter 4, Section 4, The French and Indian War, beginning on page 108. American Diary. Commanded by General James Wolfe, about 1,800 British troops landed on the north shore of Quebec an hour before daybreak to get in position to attack the soldiers. The soldiers had to climb a steep cliff. Scrambling up the slope, the British soldiers ran into a little firing from French guards. They continued to climb until they gained the top of the cliff. By the time the sun rose over Quebec, British and French soldiers were prepared to battle on the plains of Abram outside the city. From a letter by General George Townsend. The British take action. Main idea. William Pitt helped to turn the tide of the French and Indian War to the colonists' favor. History in you. Has a friend ever given you advice that you wish you had followed? Read to learn why one British general was defeated because of his failure to accept advice. The Battle of Quebec, fought in 1759, was a deciding moment in the conflict between Britain and France. That conflict was known as the French and Indian War. This war raged in North America through the late 1750s and early 1760s. The French and Indian War was part of a larger struggle between the British and the French. That struggle involved or included control of world trade and power on the seas. In 1754, the governor of Massachusetts made an announcement to the Colonial Assembly. He told them that the French were on the way to making themselves masters of this continent. The French were building well-armed forts throughout the Great Lakes region and the Ohio River Valley. Their network of alliances or unions with Native Americans allowed the French to control large areas of land stretching from the St. Lawrence River in Canada all the way south to New Orleans. The French and their Native American allies seemed to be winning control of the American frontier. The final showdown was about to begin. During the early stages of the French and Indian War, the British colonists fought the French and the Native Americans with little help from Britain. In 1754, however, the government in London decided to intervene in the conflict. It was alarmed by the new forts the French were building and by Washington's defeat at Fort Necessity. In the fall of 1754, Great Britain appointed General Edward Braddock, Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in America. Braddock's mission was to drive the French forces from the Ohio Valley region. Braddock marches to Duquesne. In June 1755, Braddock started out from Virginia with about 1,400 red-coated British soldiers and a smaller force of blue-coated colonial militia. George Washington served as an aide to Braddock during the campaign. On the march to Fort Duquesne, Washington reported that Braddock, primary source, halted to level every molehill and to erect bridges over every brook, by which means we were 4 days in getting 12 miles from Life of Washington. Washington told Braddock that his army's style of marching was not well suited to fighting on the frontier. Lined up in columns and rows, wearing bright-colored uniforms, the troops became easy targets. Braddock ignored Washington's advice. Native Americans and French troops ambushed the British on July 9th. The British were confused and frightened. They could not even see their attackers, who were hidden in the forest and shooting at them from behind trees. Braddock was killed. Defeated, the British lost nearly 1,000 men. Washington led the survivors back to Virginia. Britain declares war on France. The fighting in America helped start a new war in Europe. This war was known as the 7 Years' War. After arranging an alliance with Prussia, Britain declared war on France in 1756. Prussia fought France and its allies in Europe. Britain fought France in the Caribbean, India, and North America. Early in the war, French troops captured several British forts, and their Native American allies began raiding frontier farms from New York to Pennsylvania. They killed settlers, burned farmhouses and crops, and drove many families back toward the coast. French forces from Canada captured British forts at Lake Ontario and at Lake George. Pitt takes charge. Great Britain's prospects or chances for success in America improved after William Pitt came to power. Pitt served as Secretary of State and then as Prime Minister of Great Britain and was a great military planner. To avoid arguments from the colonists about the cost of the war, Pitt decided that Great Britain would pay for the war supplies, no matter the cost. Pitt ran up an enormous debt. After the war, the British raised the colonist taxes to help pay this debt. Pitt had only delayed the moment when the colonists had to pay their share of the bill. Pitt wanted more than just a clear path to the Western Territories. He also intended to conquer French Canada. He sent British troops to North America under commanders Geoffrey Amherst and James Wolfe. In 1758, a British assault captured the fortress at Louisbourg. That same year, a group of New Englanders, led by British officers, captured Fort Frontenac at Lake Ontario. Still another British force took Fort Duquesne in Pennsylvania, which was renamed Fort Pitt. Reading check. Describing. Why was William Pitt successful at managing the war for Britain? The fall of New France. Main idea. The fall of Quebec and Montreal ended the French and Indian War in North America. History in you. What factors led to success or failure in battle? Read to learn how the British defeated the French in the French and Indian War. The British had so many victories in 1759 that people said the church bells of London wore thin with joyous ringing. The greatest victory of the war, though, took place in the heart of New France, the Battle of Quebec. Quebec was the capital of New France and was located on top of a cliff overlooking the St. Lawrence River. Quebec was thought to be impossible to attack. In September 1759, British General James Wolfe's scouts spotted a poorly guarded path along the back of the cliff. During the night, Wolfe's soldiers overwhelmed the French guards and scrambled up the path. The British troops then surprised and defeated the French army on a field called the Plains of Abraham. The Treaty of Paris. The fall of Quebec and General Amherst's capture of Montreal the following year brought an end to the fighting in North America. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 forced France to give Canada and most of its lands east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. Great Britain also received Florida from France's ally, Spain. Spain acquired French lands west of the Mississippi River, the Louisiana Territory, as well as the port of New Orleans. The Treaty of Paris marked the end of France as a power in North America. The continent was now divided between Great Britain and Spain. Reading check. Determining cause and effect. What happened to France's territory as a result of its defeat in the war? Trouble on the frontier. Main idea. Continued conflict between Native Americans and British settlers led to the Proclamation of 1763. History in you. How would you feel if a CD you ordered and paid for never arrived? Read to learn why some land investors were furious about the Proclamation of 1763. The French loss dealt a blow to the Native Americans of the Ohio River Valley. They had lost their French allies and trading partners. The British raised the prices of their goods and, unlike the French, refused to pay the Native Americans for the use of their land. Worst of all, more British soldiers began moving west onto Native American lands. Pontiac's War. Pontiac, chief of an Ottawa village near Detroit, regarded British settlers as a threat to his way of life. Just as Benjamin Franklin tried to bring the colonies together with his Albany plan, Pontiac wanted Native American groups to unite to fight the British. In the spring of 1763, Pontiac gathered forces and captured the British fort at Detroit and other British outposts. That summer, Native Americans killed settlers along the Pennsylvania and Virginia frontiers during Pontiac's War. The war finally ended in August 1765 after the British defeated Pontiac's allies. Pontiac signed a peace treaty and the British pardoned him. The Proclamation of 1763. To prevent more fighting, Britain called a halt to the settlers' westward expansion. The Proclamation of 1763 set the Appalachian Mountains as the temporary western boundary for the colonies. The proclamation especially angered those who owned shares in land companies. These speculators or investors had already bought land west of the mountains. They were furious that Britain ignored their land claims. More conflicts would soon arise between Britain and the colonists. Reading check. Explaining. Why were some colonists angered by the Proclamation of 1763? Section 4 Review. Vocabulary. Number 1. Define the following. Involve, alliance, prospect, speculator. Main ideas. Number 2. Identifying. Before Pitt took charge, what advantages did the French have in North America? Summarizing. What effect did the Treaty of Paris have on France? 4. Discussing. Why did Pontiac want the Native Americans to join forces? We'll skip over to 7. Answer the essential question. How did the outcome of the French and Indian War determine who controlled North America? That does it for Chapter 4, Section 4.